Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting on Friday, July 19th, with one topic, and that has to do with the working group and the Board of Selectmen's discussion on marijuana retail applications. My intention this morning is to allow each applicant, if they want to make a final statement. When that's done, even though it's not a public hearing and it's not required, I will open it up to conversations from the audience. The only thing I ask you to do is make it brief, make your point, and don't be repetitious so we can get this done. When that's done, then we'll go into deliberations. At that time, I'm not going to have people raise their hands. We're not going to go through that. We've gone through this, I think, many times, and people have had plenty of opportunity to speak. So, any other comments by the board before I do this? Would you?
Leave with the pledge? Leave with the pledge?
Oh, pledge of allegiance. I'm sorry. Mr. Clerk, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, sir. Please.
Linda Giannetta, 417 King Street. I'm going to read this letter from David, as he's not here. He's been on vacation. Dear Board of Selectmen and Ms. Town Administrator Nazarian, I'm writing to you today to express my gratitude in considering me and Community Care Collective as a potential recipient of a host community agreement with the Town of Littleton for the purpose of a licensed marijuana retail establishment. It is with great regret that I'm unable to attend the special meeting scheduled for Friday, July 19th, 2019. I will be out of the area on Thursday, July 18th in the early morning due to a trip that my wife has had planned for us prior to this meeting being scheduled. I will be back in the area and available on Tuesday, July 23rd. I would like to extend my appreciation to the Marijuana Working Group, each board member, and all other town officials who have been involved in this application process to date. I am certain it has been time-consuming and emotional. I have been following along intently to each of the scheduled Board of Selectmen meetings regarding this topic of an LMRE. I have been both physically in attendance and have viewed the meetings on LCTV from my home in Littleton. I have not physically attended every meeting as I did not want to be a distraction or disruption to the process. Please know that my absence was out of respect for the board and that I have invested my heart and soul into this process. I am very motivated and excited to create a strong partnership with our town of Littleton. As I have mentioned many times throughout the application process, I am a proud Littleton resident with a wife who was born and raised in Littleton and 3 young children who are all enrolled in our Littleton Public Schools. I have the greatest intentions to improve the quality of life of our town through the financial benefit that I intend to produce for the town of Littleton. I sincerely love our town, and if I'm fortunate enough to be awarded the opportunity to enter into negotiations for a host community agreement with the town of Littleton, I look forward to a mutually beneficial agreement that will enhance our town for many years to come. Thank you again for your time and consideration. David Giannetta.
Thank you. Christine?
I wasn't prepared, so I'll just read the cover letter from my proposal.
Sure.
For the folks watching now. Thank you. Dear Select Board, in the fall of 2000, my husband and I bought our home in Littleton. A year later, I gave birth to our first son and left my career in Boston behind to raise him. As a newcomer and new mother living in a secluded area of town, I felt isolated and hadn't yet made many friends. In July of 2003, our house burned to the ground. Aside from a handful of trinkets we dug out of the ashes, we lost everything we'd ever owned, and it was devastating. Or so I initially believed. In the days following our fire, something extraordinary happened. The people of Littleton, who we'd never met, came together to take care of us. A vacationing family had keys to their house delivered to give us a place to stay. A police officer passed her hat around the town offices and brought us an envelope containing $217. The owner of Noah's Ark delivered a portable crib, diapers, and clothes for our little son. Over the next few weeks, household items and clothing and food poured in. The Independent ran a story mentioning our clothing sizes, and one day a lady I didn't know brought us a few packages of brand-new underwear. In receiving that practical, nurturing gift, I saw the true face of Littleton. The people of this village take care of each other. As I stood there looking through tears at those underwear, I swore an oath that I have lived by ever since. In that moment, I promised myself that I would dedicate my life to giving back to the community of Littleton. When we got back on our feet, I did my best to fulfill that promise. I went to work for Littleton Church. For a few years, my family shared our Thanksgiving dinner with 50 Littleton residents who didn't have a place to go. I worked for 9 years on the school councils at Shaker Lane and Russell Street. I helped to build a nonprofit farm to feed my neighbors in need. I raised my boys to be tutors and Boy Scouts and to volunteer in Littleton. My husband and I serve, or did, on town boards. These contributions are important to our family, but the idea of Littleton Apothecary and the Littleton Project go beyond what even the most committed family can contribute to its community. A year ago, I began my education into the requirements of launching a cannabis shop. I looked at every available property and chose one that I thought would have the least impact. My operational experience and leadership span an unusually applicable range of industries: construction and logistical oversight, banking and finance from both regulatory and operational domains, startups and small-town nonprofits. My specialized skill set makes me uniquely qualified to create and smoothly operate an establishment any town should feel secure hosting. This model, however, is for Littleton. I am steadfast in my commitment to being a good neighbor and devoted to the welfare of my community. The Littleton Project, a nonprofit granting organization, will be endowed by profits from Littleton Apothecary, governed by a board of directors comprised of Littleton residents. The Littleton Project will accept grant requests and award grants to applicants in Littleton based on their project's ability to create a positive impact in town. Once fully endowed, the project will grant up to $150,000 a year to Littleton applicants in perpetuity. All cannabis establishments will create jobs and generate tax revenue in Littleton. Some may offer volunteer hours and donations to town groups. I'm not interested in making token donations to popular causes as a means of negotiation. I have spent the past several years of my life volunteering 100 hours a week to my town and raising tens of thousands of dollars for Littleton causes. My goal and the goal of Littleton Apothecary is to create something non-negotiable and enduring, something that will, for generations, far outlive my ability to contribute to my town. The Littleton Project will put the money from cannabis sales directly into the hands of the people of Littleton who are honestly committed to the well-being of our neighbors. Many are skeptical, even frightened, of the prospect of cannabis shops opening in Littleton. I am undaunted. My life and experiences have led me to this moment and provided me with the skills and passion to create something that will truly benefit my town. The words of the late Senator Paul Wellstone have long been my personal motto. We all do better when we all do better. This idea is the founding principle of Littleton Apothecary. I know what it feels like to have nothing. But I also know that an infinitely practical gift can change the course of a person's life. Together we can provide practical gifts all over town and bit by bit improve our own lives by improving the lives of everyone in Littleton. Thank you.
Before we go any further, I do want to express a sincere thanks to the working group, which consisted of 2 members of the planning board, Anna Houston, who is here, Ed Mullen, and my fellow colleagues, Chuck DeCoste and Cindy Napoli. The amount of time that they've spent on this has been tremendous, time-consuming, emotionally, physically probably, and it's been tough. And as board members, I don't know or can't remember the last time I had a subject or a topic that had this much interest, this many phone calls, this many emails in a long, long time. So I know the interest is out there. And I will open it up to the audience, and once again, I just ask you to, state your name, your address, make your comment, and be as brief as possible so we can get on with this important topic. Okay, anyone?
I'm Jillian Shaw, Slay Riley. I just want to comment about the letter that was submitted to the Board of Selectmen, Town Council, Town Administrators last night that I submitted. It's okay, I would like to read the last page of that letter. You received letters in support of Littleton Apothecary, but ask yourself this: do they know the real information that was listed in this letter? Would they write the same letters knowing who Miss Bronson and Miss Nordhaus truly are? Are those writing letters being told everything they want to hear? Where is character ranked in the application process? Is it even quantified? Are you hoping that the Cannabis Control Commission does their homework? Or with so many applications, will they rubber stamp it because if you approve the Board of Selectmen application? Our town is suffering enough with the recent embezzlement. Miss Bronson and Miss Nordhaus have proven to be untrustworthy and deceptive and are not people in town that Littleton town or its residents should have any business or agreement with. Please, to protect the Littleton residents, I urge you not to approve Littleton Apothecary application for retail marijuana license.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Will Nadeau, 18 Robinson Road. Just quickly, gentlemen at the last meeting hit on a point that I wanted to talk about today, which was risk. We were urged to move forward with this because we have to at some point accept risk. I just wanted to say I've been doing risk management with the Marine Corps active duty for 8 years, reserve for 2. And when you don't know the risks, it's one of those times that gives you pause. And you can't go forward until you are able to define the risk better. What I would say is that we don't understand the long-term or even medium-range risks of bringing a marijuana dispensary into close proximity to residential neighborhoods or a town like this. I would urge caution because, Mr. Gerbig, you said that this board was to handle the incurables, right? That the following process was to deal with the curable causes, traffic mitigation, whatever it was, but your responsible was the incurables. I consider those risks, those long-term and medium-range risks, to be one of those incurables. And those risks are going to be, the subjects of that risk will be my family, will be the families on our neighborhood, and the residences in close proximity to these places. So it's an unknown, it's a risk, and unfortunately it's one we just don't know at this point. So we'll be the recipients of whatever that fallout is. So I'd appreciate caution or rejecting at least 531 King Street's proposal. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Board of Selectmen. Ted Doucette, Wickham Avenue. I just want to speak in support of both applicants. I know I'm late to the party, and I appreciate all the work that's been done. I've been in support of marijuana in town since the medical marijuana tried to come in a few years ago. And it's because that it is a legal product that is, is legal for sale in the state now. And these are people who are willing to invest in Littleton and want to give back, and their parents and their residents. And I think they should be granted the license. I think that regards to being close to residences, they are proposed in areas where this is allowed. They're not going into a residential area, they're going into a commercial or industrial area. So I think that this should be voted in the positive, and we should show that Littleton can be a leader in the state and allow this type of business. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kelly, Parker Hunt, Mill Road. So I've gone to many meetings and I've watched everything else on TV. In my opinion, if there are any questions that can't be answered or concerns that can't be addressed, it really needs to be put on hold. If there's this many emails being sent, this many phone calls being made, this many meetings being had for the town, then there are a lot of questions. And no one really seems to have solid answers that people are confident with the responses. And there's a lot on social media. I read it. I understand that there's like 3 sides to each story, right? And the truth is somewhere in the middle. Got it. But I just feel like this is such a big deal. It's not something little we're venturing into. And our town is loved. People are dying to move into this town. Schools are great. There's many people who put their heart and soul into this town. Everyone appreciates everything that's done. And there's a reason why construction's booming and people are dying to move in here. It's a great town. It's a great place to raise your family. I don't really have any opinion because I don't feel educated enough. I feel like I'm trying to do my research, but on either way. But I feel like it is so irresponsible to move forward with something that's such a big deal if every question isn't answered and every concern isn't addressed where people feel comfortable and confident. I think that's it.
Anyone else? Please.
Emily Young, 178 Harwood Ave. I would just echo the risk and not knowing everything. I looked at the assessments and I think there are a lot of, it's hard for me to say there's no impact on traffic. There's no impact on so many parts of this town. I would argue, I absolutely love the fact that if we had to have this and if we felt the risks are okay, I love the concept of Littleton residents doing this. I love that. But I just don't think we're there yet. I also think there's implications to other businesses that can co-locate in areas near these companies, and we haven't thought that through. And we can argue all day long whether the residents of this town felt they knew what they were doing, but I think there's a lot of evidence out there that a lot of people didn't understand it, even people who went to town meeting and participate in the process. So I just feel like given all of that, there's a responsibility to slow this down and work through some of these issues and put this on pause. What's the rush? Not saying we can't do it, but I feel like there needs to be more process around this.
I'd like to make comments on that again.
Just one per person. Anyone else?
So I'll make this very quick. Lauren Borba, 29 Robinson Road, thank you so much for your time. I know that there is a lot of work and effort and everything that goes into this. This is a very big decision that you're making today, so thank you for taking the time. Wanted just to speak, thank you for posting out the survey as you think about the different selections within advantageous, highly advantageous. And as you go through them, for me, I was thinking, what are the ones that are most important and kind of that, stop decision as we go through. So perhaps security, we rank very high, and of course that would be one. If there was no security, perhaps you don't move forward. So as you think about that, what are the ones that are the stop gates versus what are the ones that are, just the have to have, if you will. As I think about that, for me, under Section 3 site requirements, number 4, the proposed location of marijuana establishment is compatible with adjacent neighborhoods and uses. I won't read the rest. For that one, for of course Robinson Road, I would say that one is very much is a no, is inadequate. It does back up to a neighborhood that is highly dense with kids. And yes, while we are not an official location of a daycare or a homeschooling perhaps, it is a place where many kids congregate. We're constantly even in the NATO's backyard, which is the direct abutter. So as you think about the different decisions being made and what's more important to this decision, especially with the uncurables, I would just like to put that out there that, for that one, I view that one is highly inadequate for the 531 King Street location.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again.
Anyone else? Sure.
Yes. Sean Abbott's 10 Trot Road. My first question is, can I address a question to this on the summary that was put out, or the review, or is that there was something on the website called Review Marijuana Working Groups Evaluations. It's the application review. Can I ask a question on this review, or is that for later discussion?
I'm addressing. I'm going to address it.
Yeah, fine.
Okay. So I'm not just this is on the website, and I would encourage anybody to go and read this. It's called Review Marijuana Working Groups Evaluations. And this is the application review. I assume this is the document that you're going to make your decision on.
Hey, Sean, I don't want to cut you off, but I just want to interject. This is a review. It's not necessarily it's not a recommendation. It's just we had to compile and kind of weed things down so that we could have a more focused and you could have a more focused view into what we're deciding.
Okay, so like I'm on section 3, it said site requirements, item C. I'm curious to how did the working group come to the conclusion that the proposed location would minimize adverse traffic and parking impact? How many customers do they expect a day? How many days and the hours of the operation would these establishments be? How is it advantageous without seeking a full traffic study as it was noted on the paper? I'm curious to how that conclusion came about.
Through the chair, Mr. Abbott's, the working group had some conversation around that, and the language of that, I'll read the whole section there. Applicant has demonstrated the proposed location minimizes adverse traffic and parking impacts on the town, and that appropriate mitigation is planned for any impact that may be found to exist. So it may be an interpretation thing where you're looking at it one way and the working group itself looked at it a different way. We felt as though the parking plans and the parking studies that were done, or I'm sorry, the traffic studies that were done, I apologize for my scribble. I didn't realize this was going to be scanned and shared with everybody. And this is how I write, unfortunately. Half the time I can't read it. But it does say need to see full traffic study. So there was a summary given to us from CCC. That's why it's connected to the CCC, the vote there. And we realize and understand that there will be an impact. But what we were looking for and what the guidance from the CCC is that the applicant minimizes that impact to the best of their ability and puts forward appropriate mitigation plans.
And so my question, so how is it that they demonstrated that?
Specifically, how did each applicant demonstrate that? Through, for as far as parking is concerned, through expanded parking, alternative parking sites for employees to open up parking for customers. In the case of CCC, there was there is a queue road that when we had our presentation, they demonstrated that cars will be coming in on this, I forget the length of the road, I think that was discussed at the meeting, but, so cars would be queuing up there, and then there was, in the 80s, I think it was 87 parking spaces proposed if he would have maximized that. As far as Littleton Apothecary, that they had demonstrated similarly that they would lease additional spaces to mitigate parking, and I believe that they would have employees park in areas that would not impact customers coming to the site. Each of them did demonstrate a proposed customer count, and I believe those numbers are public as part of the plan that was presented by each of the applicants. So I'm not going to profess what those numbers are. I didn't bring it. Yeah, okay. I didn't bring the proposals, but Chase has them right there.
Let me directly answer a couple of your questions, sir. The first is in terms of number. I don't think Littleton Apothecary actually puts a hard number on it, but they do cite to the chair of the Cannabis Control Commission, current cannabis retail sites located in communities with similar demographics to Littleton are serving 200 to 300 customers a day. The unfortunately acronymed Community Care Collective, also CCC, gives specific numbers that range in the first year daily average total of 419 up to 531 in year 5, and both applicants put forward some version of a traffic plan or traffic study. The Community Care Collective put forward a true traffic count, put out a measurement device in the road. I think you'll see noted here, it's not a complete full traffic study yet. That's something for the planning board, but they provided us with that data and that sort of preliminary analysis. Littleton Apothecary looked to a traffic study that was done on the Route 2A Air Road at Willowbrook Road, Bruce Street corridor. So that's not a study they did. They were referencing to a study that had already been done. So although neither applicant has put forward a true and comprehensive traffic study, we've got a substantial amount of data to look at to make those determinations. It wasn't, in neither case was it just an ad hoc, and we don't think this is gonna, have a negative traffic impact. There is still some qualitative evaluation that goes into that at this level. The planning board with the special permit process has the authority to request a true formal traffic study if they so desire. You can't say one way or the other right now whether they would request such a thing. But we're sort of halfway between nothing and a full-on traffic study. So something to make those determinations based on. Did it get to your questions?
So you said there would be about 500 cars estimated on King Street?
I don't recall what they estimated in terms of cars. On King Street, the numbers range from customers, daily average number of customers per day ranged from 419 to 531 within the first 5-year
So
period.
400 to 500
That's
per
right.
day.
And
And that doesn't have an impact on traffic or parking spots? I'm just trying to understand that one. I'm just trying to figure out how that would be advantageous.
well, I think that's part of the qualitative evaluation that the board went through, right? It's one thing to count the numbers, and I'm sure that that will come up as the board discusses this. Is that advantageous or not?
The way that they handle it, is that mitigating it? I wouldn't say that it's advantageous. When we were going through this process, the word advantageous probably wasn't, we had deliberated on what word we should use, but doing nothing and getting no cars is ultimately great, but to fold into all of this, our master plan talks about bringing more cars to the common and getting more flow. So we have to kind of look at everything as far as the impact is concerned. And if you have a couple hundred cars or 400 cars or 500 cars in 5 years going to one address, certainly there's going to be an impact. And it's how it is mitigated, and through either an appointment plan, something that I believe both petitioners, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe both petitioners said that there was the opportunity to set up an appointment plan where instead of just having people free-flowing through, similar to what on Central Street in Air, the medical dispensary has an appointment plan where you can't show up and get inside the door if you don't have an appointment. So that would be able to be one mitigation plan, and they both had mentioned that is a possibility for them to implement.
If I may interject. So the definition, just to be clear, of advantageous is demonstrates an adequate and thorough response. So the information provided in response to that requirement as part of the process, we determined was adequate and thorough. So it's not that rating this, we actually dove into the specifics of the response, but the information they did provide was adequate to respond to the question, if that clarifies it better for you. If you look at the definitions under the application review, what did we consider to be highly advantageous, what was advantageous, and what was inadequate?
Thank you.
So they tell you it's going to be a traffic nightmare, that's kind of okay?
Well, like I said, we didn't dive into the actual traffic studies, and actually, with respect to one of the applicants, we're still waiting for the full report. But so they did respond, though. They did give us something. They provided an adequate response.
This is, if I may.
Yeah.
This is literally an application review to make sure that they check the boxes that we require them
Exactly.
to submit in order for us to be able to deliberate.
Well, that's exactly what this feels like to me, it's just checking the boxes and kind of rushing it through.
Well, I'm sorry that you feel that way.
That's just the impression that this gives, because when I look at
That's
it, the
fine.
review, and I apologize to everybody out there that's volunteering their time and spent countless hours, and I'm coming in at the 11th hour chewing this up.
You're right, Sean.
But the review just appears rushed to me, all I have to go on is this document, and it just looks like, in all due respect, someone forgot to do their homework, and they came in 5 minutes before the class, and they just rushed to fill this
So
out.
I personally take offense to that. So if that's your perception, I apologize that we gave you that perception, but I take offense to that because I've been involved in this for about 4 years.
I'm just telling
And
you
I've done
how it
homework,
looks.
I've gone into the State House, I've gone to hearings, I've sat in the law library in Boston and sat in, the CCC has put on education classes that I've gone in, they were for applicants, and I went in and sat in and educated myself. So although I appreciate anybody that comes out and gives us their opinion, I would appreciate you not making accusations about somebody not doing their homework and showing up and just checking the boxes. That's my opinion, and that's how I feel. You've said your piece, I think we need to move on. There's others with their hands up.
Okay. Anna, did you want to say?
Anna Houston. So what I wanted to say about the traffic question, if you will, is that with the location on King Street, as Ms. Napoli pointed out, we did not receive the full traffic study, rather there were excerpts from it, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that we were waiting for that to be able to really identify whether that response was adequate or inadequate. And so because we don't have their full traffic study, I don't believe it's adequate at this point.
Any other comments?
Alicia McDonald, Long Lake Road. I understand that we are a yes community and that we can't change that. And what I am going to say, you can't really use in your decision, but just in my experience, I'm a nurse, my husband's in law enforcement, I have a sibling who's been to rehab 6 times. And for me to know
All right.
from this, that I find politically advantageous for our community.
Thank you. Liz?
Liz Cohen-Shell, 92 Colonial Drive. Just a couple of points, Mr. Set mentioned about bringing in businesses. I think we should take into consideration the businesses that are already established that will be affected by this. I think that's a huge point to look at. I also think that we need to focus on the fact of what the burden is we're placing, and make sure that we're not placing the burden on our police department that's already stretched very thin, and making sure that each applicant, if we choose to accept them, is taking that into consideration in a huge way. And also, not that I know any of the children on the Robinson Road area, but to mimic their idea of a risk, I have 4 children. It's a huge risk we're asking that you're bringing in. The clientele alone for a pot shop is a risk. And so I hope that the board truly considers that, and knows that, again, mimicking what Alicia said, we are a yes community, but we all made decisions based on meetings that I don't think we all understood. That's a huge point that I'm hoping you take with you when you make your decision.
Thanks, Liz.
Any others? Before we close it off? Last chance? Okay. No. The pleasure of the board, how do you want to tackle this right now?
So at this time, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to recuse myself from the deliberation. My mother is a business owner that will be affected by any decision that's made with respect to 531 King Street. And the advice of legal counsel, I'm also going to recuse myself from any deliberation with respect to the 160 Air Road site.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I would like to comment before we start talking about individual applicants.
You want this first?
Thank you, sir. The public certainly is aware that we had 3 different parties present their applications to us. The fact that we are looking at 2 applications reflects the marijuana working group's evaluation of all 3 applicants, which found one of those applicants deficient to the extent that they didn't consider their application to be complete. And so consequently, we, the Board of Selectmen, have 2 applications to look at. Nonetheless, with the other applicant, the herb company that we had, looking at their application material based on where they were proposing to be located, which is essentially in the same building as Littleton Apothecary, we would have had to choose between one or the other before moving forward because they can't be co-located. And so regardless of whether or not the herb company's application was deemed complete or not by the marijuana working group, looking at Littleton Apothecary's application versus the herb companies, just in a vacuum, whether we approve them or not, I certainly find Littleton Apothecary's application to be more responsive, more complete, and even, and what I want to say is that even if the herb company's application was included in this discussion, I think we would have, at least I would have quickly gotten to the point where we have these two applications in front of us to evaluate and review. And I think the public needs to, sort of understand how we got to two from three. And ultimately, whether the marijuana working group advanced 3 or 2 less, we would still be at this point with this decision.
Good clarification.
Do we want to go into each individually? Do we want to have a general discussion? I have no preference, I'm just happy to react to whatever. So, but there's a lot of members have. Or do we individually want to make our statements and?
One, just a couple quick points.
Nice
if I may. We could invite Anna Houston up now that there is no quorum of the marijuana working group, should that be the desire of the board. We also could ask town council to join us should the board have any questions. Certainly he could answer questions from where he's seated, but if he'd like something more formal from town council, certainly he's available, obviously.
We're both readily available there, I think.
That's fine.
I pinged Tom on this yesterday because I wanted to understand, and perhaps the public would benefit from this as well. If I understood what we talked about yesterday correctly, Tom, any applicant would still need 3 affirmative votes from this 4-member board to go forward. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So regardless of whether we have 4 or 5 members, we would still need 3 votes.
No, I mean, there's a few different ways we can do this. We can go one at a time and make a decision based upon one at a time. We can lump them all together and it's kind of like when you do nominations for reorganization or something like that. The outcomes that I foresee are we take no action at this point and just kind of take everything under advisement and make a decision down the road. Because we are a yes community and we do have 2 applicants that we have evaluated, we do at some point need to make a decision, whether it be yes or no, for each of them separately. We can approve 1, we can approve none, we can approve 2. That's where we're at right now. So, I mean, if nobody's, town council's got something.
Okay, just quickly, just to kind of help you.
Anytime I open my mouth and Tom is here, he's going to clarify.
Just to clarify what Chuck just said. So I just wanted to set the stage a little bit. So we know that Littleton can give out no more than 2 licenses. What you have before you are 2 applications, and what you're considering is whether or not to enter into negotiations with neither one or both parties. And it can be any of those. But I want to make sure that the board is comfortable with the fact that by approving one or both to enter into negotiations, that doesn't mean it's going to result in a host community agreement. That just means we're entering into negotiations with that party to see if we can agree. So it's not, this is just a kind of another step along the way. It's not, there's nothing final happening, it's just the move to begin negotiations.
I thought that's what I said.
If I may start,
Thank you.
and part of this doesn't have jurisdiction on the choices that are made, but the comments been made by many people that, how did we get here? And many times I've heard myself and other members of this board say, well, we've talked about this so many times, everyone knows about it, but a quick comment I want to make, and part of it has to do with a statement made by town council, when he talks about us being a yes community, and being, as a yes community, the town can only prohibit a type of marijuana establishment. So that by being a yes community, we can still prohibit a certain type of marijuana establishment. It goes back to the town meeting, it's been brought up many times, but I want to read exactly, inadvertently, myself, this board, maybe the planning board, when they went through all that work last year of putting together, they wrote up that article, and nowhere does it ever say in that article, do we have a choice of having 0, 1, or 2? The zero's never there. How it actually says in 173, 194, and I've read this before, but I think it's important because I think a lot of people who go to town meeting didn't understand. I got so used to it, talking with the board, I thought everyone understood. My own wife didn't understand it, and I'm in the house all the time.
You need to talk more.
It says in Part D, and it doesn't say the number here, it just says to limit the overall number of marijuana retailers that may be located within a town to an appropriate amount which shall not exceed the minimum number of marijuana retailers that are required by Mass General Law, and it gives the number, to be allowed within the town absent of a ballot vote. To me, I look back on it, it was shown to me, and I, in my own mind, I'm saying, we didn't let people know that you could say no. We went right into choosing locations and saying we can limit it to 1 or 2. So that's not what this vote is about today. I think we could have drafted that better, and I can certainly understand people with that frustration and easily misunderstood that we could have at one point said, okay, let's just start off by saying, do we want marijuana establishments or not? So I wanted to get that out there. Now, unless anyone else wants to make a statement, I don't know whether we want to go.
Joe, I do have one other thing to add there. This sort of plays off of Chuck's commentary earlier about what the board has looked at going forward. And I think we're all going into this with eyes wide open as far as the fact that the marijuana retail industry as a whole can privatize profits and socialize the risk, right? That, in a sentence, is fundamentally the concern. And we've looked long and hard at what other states, what other communities have done, what are the real risks that have been realized, what are the fears that people have had that haven't been realized. For just by way of example, in Colorado's 5-year review of recreational cannabis, they actually didn't see a change in the number of users under the age of 20. That stayed at an admittedly high 19-ish%, but 5 years after legalization, it stayed about the same. So the point being, this board has been looking at every piece of information that we can get our hands on. And part of this structure and part of where we go from here is entering into potentially a host community agreement with one or both of these proposed shops. And the way that the socialization of those risks is handled is through both the community impact fee as well as the excise tax. And I don't think this board has any inclination, although I'm only speaking for myself here, of entering into a host community agreement with either applicant that is anything less than the maximum amount of 3% mitigation payment that we're entitled to. And that specifically is intended to pay for things like additional police requirements, anything directly related to those marijuana retail establishments. And so we recognize the socialization of the risk, and we also see some mechanism that the CCC, Cannabis Control Commission, has given us to deal with the socialization of that risk. And so it's not a situation where it is 100% privatization of profits and socialization of risk, because we're able to extract some of that out of the applicants. And so I don't think anyone would be willing to go forward if we were just going to let the shops come in and let the chips fall where they may. So with that, Joe, I think that's all I've got for introductory comments.
Please.
Nice, it's not just me.
So just one more, so it's to follow up on the zoning change, just to make sure we're all in the same place. Back at the May 2018 town meeting, if we wanted to be more restrictive on the number of licenses or prohibit, and if we want to do that in the future, it's also going to require a ballot vote. So we can't just change we couldn't be more restrictive in the zoning than we are currently without a ballot vote, and we can't change it in the future to be more restrictive without a ballot vote. So it's a two-step process.
Thank you. Is that what you said? Obviously, this is an emotional topic, and it hits a lot of people in their own backyard, literally. And, we all have a little bit of NIMBYism when it comes to something happening in our own backyard. So I hope that, and Sean, I apologize, it is emotional. Clearly, you're passionate about this. I took offense, obviously, to your comments, because I've put a lot of time into it. We all have.
It just doesn't demonstrate it, because there's no written summary, it just looks like handwritten notes, that's all I'm saying.
Appreciate that. And I apologize if any of my comments throughout this process have offended anybody, but we're just trying to do the best we can, try to gather as much information as we can, and make the best decision possible for our community. So I hope everybody appreciates that and realizes that, and I hope that personally I didn't come across the wrong way, or now we're faced with the tough part, not the fluff part.
Right.
I'll jump in as the remaining member of the working group, because we have to start somewhere and I have to get to work eventually. So we did go through this process in order to make it easier to determine whether or not we had adequate information, and whether or not the applicants that we had before us met our requirements. From looking at the summary on the last page, for those of you that have it, there was, Littleton Apothecary did have one area in which it was inadequate, and that was relative to security. And the one area where we kind of left the door open, Anna, correct me if I'm wrong here and keep me honest, the one area where we thought that CCC, or collective, I'll call it because it can be confusing, Community Care Collective may have slipped from advantageous to inadequate, was the traffic study, am I correct? Yeah?
Well, the traffic study was one because we didn't have the final. Additionally, the group did not have an opportunity to vote on a section, I believe it was 2G, which is the wind down information. Because
Yeah,
we didn't have that. And then the site requirements, A and B, we were split 2 to 1.
So, according to council's interpretation, if any of those checkboxes, if you will, are inadequate, then we have not met our requirements. I'm looking for your clarification on this, I'm not.
So I think that's for you to determine. So you've determined that there is a part of the application that's inadequate. Is that sufficient for you to say, we don't think they can fix it, so we don't want to move to a host community agreement? Or we note that it's deficient and it's something to work on in the host community agreement process?
Or a third alternative, allow them to fix it prior to taking a vote. Potentially, I mean, so that's a third alternative. So, did I mix it up enough for everybody? I was going for clarity, and I think I just muddied it a little bit. Paul's got some comments?
We're just gonna get into it, might as well get into it, right? Okay. I voted for the ballot article, but I don't really have any personal investment in the business. I can't see myself being a customer of either of these stores. But I'm mostly sympathetic to them as risk takers, business people who want to, have put a lot of time, effort, and likely a lot of money on the line to do something that's allowable by law. And I tend to want to let people do what they want to do, and I don't have a problem with that. And I don't share a lot of the concerns about what impacts either one of these proposals may have on their respective neighborhoods. But I respect that others do, and I'm taking that in mind. For my part, I could very easily see both of these things in business, and I think if we approve them both, the likelihood is in a year from now, we would have forgotten all the concerns we had, and that they would blend into the landscape. But a gnawing reality is that as long as we go into this process, and for all the work that's gone into it, from Chuck and Cindy and Ed and Anna principally, but all the board members, is that there's still doubts about the basic process that isn't of all our own making. We were kind of making it up on the fly because that's the position that the legislature unfortunately put us in. I'm not sure everybody knew when they were voting it on the ballot how that was going to have ramifications at the local level. I wouldn't have changed my vote one way or the other that way, personally, but I can understand where others might. I understood, I think, explicitly what we were voting on at town meeting, but I'll accept that other people may not have. And again, the state set up this process where if your town voted yes on the ballot, well, then you're presumed yes. If you want, you can limit it by creating these planning districts, but if you do that, you're pretty much sending the message that you're welcoming the businesses, and a bit of a catch-22 there. So you go ahead and do that to, impose some sort of restriction on it, and then if you have the planning maps, well, and people do apply, well, you're allowed to have a process with some criteria, but if you do that, once again, you're sending the message that you're welcoming the applications, and that's the situation we find ourselves in right now. I think our winnowing process has been about as thorough and fair as it possibly could under the circumstances, and we're left with two, I would say, very solid applicants, but we're also left with the largely dissatisfied public, and we don't have a magic wand to make that whole thing go away, but we do at least have an opportunity to get more town consensus on this. There's enough deficiencies in both proposals, and I'll elaborate my own thoughts on that in a moment, to say no on merit in each case and invite the process of going back to the ballot and going back to town meeting with a fully informed town so that issue is no longer in play when we deal with these in the future. And I would say, just to cover that point before I forget it, I'm not usually this functional this hour of the morning. Well, 8 o'clock's usually pretty good. Like my cat gets me up at 5 a.m. to feed him, so I'm usually awake by that point. I would say the safety concerns and the recent changes in the management structure of the apothecary are enough cause for doubt that I'd like to see that fleshed out, and that would be, it raises enough doubt. I'm very enthused, more than just satisfied, but enthused about that whole proposal's basis. It's unique in the state. We should be proud of that, and I hope eventually that will succeed here in Littleton. I don't have any problem with Mr. Giannetta's proposal either, which is more straightforward a business venture, and that's based on pretty solid foundation. He followed the rules, but not much has been done to address legitimate concerns of neighbors, even if it is in a zone that the town voted on. We see the planning board and the ZBA deal weekly with issues for proposals that are all within legitimate districts, and yet that doesn't preclude having concerns on specific issues within a legitimate district. So I think before I could feel comfortable voting affirmatively on that one, I would like to have seen more of an effort to address those issues. So my advice, or my suggestion is that unless I'm persuaded otherwise, and I walked in here this morning not being sure what I'd do, is that we would vote no on each of them on merit, explain those reasons, and then invite a process that allows the town to know exactly what it is they're doing when they vote both on a ballot and at a town meeting. And I'll tell you, in a bigger picture, the reason I'm coming down in this direction is largely this. Frankly, I don't think this is the most important issue in town, but it risks clouding a lot of other important issues: a new library, a new senior center, a sewer system, a revitalized common. Those are the more important things, and I can foresee that if we allow this, after whatever votes we take this morning, to have people leaving the room feeling that something happened or didn't happen without a fully informed public or a impure process, that we're going to have enough anger out there that it's just going to fester and affect other things, and we shouldn't invite that. And I've been involved in enough issues over the years where I've had to frustratingly give in and allow something to be put off a year and sometimes put off 20 years before the town is ready to embrace it. And I hope that isn't the case here, that length of time anyway. But I think at this point in time, just what's based on the table, my personal feelings are that I wouldn't have a problem with each of them, but in my capacity as a selectman, I would advocate voting no on each of them and suggesting the course of action that I just mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Levy. Mr. Coach, you want to go next? We'll just...
I just want to make one follow-up comment to, as much as I appreciate Paul's perspective, no matter which way we vote, we're going to create some of that divisiveness and that divide and anger amongst folks, because we did pass 2/3. We did pass this. So, I mean, we've got people that are in the room and are actively asking us to go one way, with the exception of Mr. Doucette. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
If Jay's got something, I'm formulating my thoughts, and you get going.
I'm happy to go. I've said continuously that my evaluation is really based on what is curable, what's incurable. Right? That's fundamentally the paradigm that I'm evaluating these under, and recognize that isn't. That's my paradigm, right? And it's not necessarily the one that's imposed upon my colleagues. When I look at these applications, going down the list of what the working group found and evaluated, going down the list of what I found and evaluated, there are certain elements that I agree are challenges for each applicant. Let's start with traffic. I think in both cases, I find that to be at least the data that's been provided to us at least sufficient to go forward. I would expect that the planning board would dive a little bit deeper into that in the case of both applicants. Taking the data, for example, from the, granted just the excerpts from CCC's application, we're looking at on an hourly basis several dozen cars. Okay. Granted, that traffic analysis, or the excerpts of that traffic analysis, did not fully flesh out what that looks like as a percentage. I still find that to be, at least at this level, a reasonable number to add to the roadways. And furthermore, recognize that it is the town's stated mission in our master plan and all over the place to revitalize the common, and that fundamentally means traffic. Now, that doesn't mean that the town just gets to sit back and say, well, there's traffic now, tough luck. But that's part of the long-range planning process associated with the common. So I see that as almost certainly curable, and if not curable, at least evaluated in detail in the planning process. and can be mitigated and understood with the traffic study. And furthermore, some of the money, again, socializing the costs, right? Well, we're asking either these applicants to cough up, in the case of CCC's application, their HCA payments would total, based on their projections, over $500,000 a year. That pays for a lot of traffic mitigation work. So, not saying that that's all that could be used for, but it does have to be tied to the establishment itself. So I find that in the case of both applicants to be curable. In terms of the community impact, I'm going to split this into two pieces. Community impact with respect to abutters. I think in the case of Littleton Apothecary, the abutters, the biggest challenge there is the amount of parking. They're a relatively smaller operation. I see that as being sufficient where they're located. It has certain challenges in terms of accessing the lot, but again, something that can be cured and addressed. And otherwise, they're in generally an industrial area. What we haven't heard is a lot of public concern with respect to the immediately localized impacts. We have heard concern with respect to Littleton Apothecary and the broader impacts about, we've got the soccer field down the road and things like that. But I see those as things that can be addressed and remedied. With respect to CCC, I see the broader community impacts as a challenge for them. I don't think Mr. Giannetta, the applicant associated with CCC, has, I don't know if he said this publicly or if he's only said it to me, I can't recall, but and he's probably said it to my other colleagues as well, but the commitment to make sure that the entirety of the property is fenced on the backside. It's already fenced, but it's sort of a falling down fence, I guess. I can't remember when I drove the area looking at it specifically, but what I've understood from him is a willingness to work with the neighbors to address that. The neighbors are shaking their heads no, so I haven't heard from him. Okay. But in either case, I find that to be close, probably curable. The concern for me with CCC is the adverse community impacts associated with displacing half a dozen or so existing businesses. I cannot get my head around no adverse community impacts associated with displacing half a dozen or so existing businesses, one of which is the only women's health clinic in Littleton, in exchange for a pot shop. And saying that and identifying that is the single biggest concern that I have is perilous because it simply invites a reapplication. Oh, well, they're not here anymore. We've kicked them out for some other reason or something like that. And look, now the building's vacant. I would say that I would view that gambit relatively negatively down the road. So I view that as the one element in both of these. Oh, I forgot to touch on security concerns. And then I'll come back to that thought. As far as security concerns go, I see those including where Littleton Apothecary hasn't provided sufficient evidence of physical security staff. I see that much in the same way as I see the traffic study information and understand why Ms. Houston may regard the CCC's application with respect to traffic as inadequate. I understand why the working group has broadly identified Littleton Apothecary's application with respect to security is inadequate. I see that as curable through the negotiation with the HCA. So we're not going to finalize an HCA with you unless you provide us this information. And we can go forward, and I think we could say the same with traffic. So anyway, I digress back to the incurable aspect of this that I see. Fundamentally, I could get my head around approving both of these if the shops were flipped in location. CCC proposes to be about 3 times the size in terms of revenue, roughly, if you back out the math in the applications, to Littleton Apothecary. I would be willing to go forward. I would be willing to go forward with something in the 531 location if it was displacing a business or 2. I have a really, really hard time getting my head around the idea that there's no adverse, or there's a minimal adverse community impact by displacing half a dozen businesses. If these 2 applicants are flip-flop their location, we put a bigger location outside of town in an industrial area, a smaller applicant in town at 531, I think I could vote for both. Where I stand right now is I don't think I can support CCC's application.
That leaves me.
Go Chucky.
Oh, man. So there's a lot of information. So I agree with much of what each of my colleagues have put forth. There are very serious, well, first of all, both applicants did meet a lot of our criteria, and I do think that on paper and based on presentations, that each of them did an excellent job in presenting the proposed businesses. I was coming at it from a curable and incurable, since you've kind of started that path, and I come to a lot of the same conclusions. I do have some concerns over Littleton Apothecary with their safety security plans. I have similar concerns over CCC relative to traffic and neighborhood impact. I do believe they're curable. I think that I'm not sure the number of businesses that are being misplaced. If I pull back out of this and take the emotion from neighbors and that kind of thing, and I look at this as a landlord or a business person, those businesses had an opportunity to protect themselves by entering into a lease, and it would have given them some protection. If the landlord wanted to do something in the case of a lease, they would have to be responsible for finding an alternative location. So although I agree that displacing businesses can have an adverse impact on the community, I think that may be outweighed by, at least from an economic standpoint, I don't want to seem cold-hearted, but from an economic standpoint, the impact to the town financially would be positively impacted. I don't feel it appropriate for us to determine, we can cure some of the concerns based upon hours of operation. We can limit traffic flow by setting up an appointment system on any location that comes before us. And some of the other concerns with regard to CCC that Anna had brought up, which kind of swayed on advantageous versus inadequate, were the impacts on the neighborhood. In speaking with Mr. Giannetta, he has, and I'm talking specifically about 531 in King Street, he, through the community meeting and meeting with some of the neighbors, he's heard their concerns, felt it was inappropriate for him to make promises to the neighbors prior to basically taking the next step. So
So maybe I
wouldn't
tipped
have-
his hand a little bit for him there.
Well, I wouldn't have, I probably would have addressed it now, with a condition that if we move forward, what is it that you'd like to see, that kind of thing, but that's, again, a business decision, and, he's been in business a long time, and he's had to make these kind of decisions and live with them, and it seems like it's worked out so far for him. That leads me down another path with regards to some of the criteria that are set forth, and some of the reasoning that we, or I at least, will take into consideration. I think each of you will as well. And Anna alluded to the dissolution, if the wind down, if in fact any of these businesses do not succeed. The fact that Mr. Giannetta owns multiple businesses and operates those businesses, and Ms. Nordhaus operated the community farm, but as far as a kind of like a P&L, I'm not going to criticize her for not being, I mean, she did the hardest job out there in raising her children, and that's, you know, my wife and I made the same choice for my wife to stay home and raise our children to do that job. So although I don't want to criticize that, that does have an impact on a decision that I would make. The other concern I have relative to Littleton Apothecary is the ownership. The LLC, based upon the Secretary of State's office, still lists the previous partner in this business as the owner of the LLC. So that's another issue I'll bring up. Going through several meetings over my tenure on either school committee or board of selectmen, we need to be able to work with whoever the partner is if we do decide to vote yes on one of these licenses. And Ms. Nordhaus has done this in the past. It actually happened on Monday night when we were going through our deliberation, where there were comments being made during our deliberation and our discussion, and much of that banter, if you will, and some of the comments that have called out individuals on different boards on social media or otherwise. I have some trust issues there. I have some trust issues with the principle of potentially a risky license that we would be issuing. And so I, although I appreciate the input of my colleagues, if we were to make a decision, my decision today, if we were going to grant a license, would be to grant a license to Community Care Collective and either not grant a license to Littleton Apothecary or not make a decision on Littleton Apothecary and try to get some clarification and answers to some of the issues that, at least for me, that I have. So that's where I am.
When you say enter into a license, you
I'm sorry, into negotiations for, again, I opened my mouth. Thank you, Tom. So it's, I mean, this is why we get paid the big bucks being up here. Unnecessary discussion.
That's the point I wanted to make, is that we sign up to make these decisions and they're not easy. Even that third Thursday last night, I was approached by someone, brought up the topic, and he smiled, looked at me, he goes, "You're gonna piss off somebody tomorrow, aren't you?" And it's true, and we have to make these choices, and we have to go with what we feel is in the best interest of the town, and sometimes it's not easy. I certainly appreciate the applicants we have because they're local. If we're gonna do anything, then that's the type of person I would want doing this. That being said, I had the opportunity real quickly at the last minute to speak with Ms. Houston the other day and go through this whole thing that was brought up and the questions and how they were asked. And I agreed with a lot of it, and some of the decisions I didn't agree with. One of the things that's written here in general, topic number 5, positive impacts on the community, and they asked 3 questions. The 3 questions after that, I could say I approved them all, but the real question is granting these, what positive impact does it have on the community as a whole? And as Mr. Glavy said, with so many important things coming up, I don't see this as having any positive impact on the town and raising too many questions. I wish I could have copied down what Mr. Zeldin said at the meeting the last time he was here. He eloquently got up and spoke on alcohol being sold near the common and this and that, but he made the comment that this is something brand new. It's a risk that we don't know about. And that's what I think my biggest problem is that it's an unknown out there that we're taking a chance with, and I'm not comfortable doing that. And I wouldn't have said that 4 months ago, but after doing more and more research and talking to people and even going through some of these questions that, if there's anything that's inadequate, do we want to take a chance saying, we're going to put a marijuana establishment in, but we said this was inadequate, but it's still going to be okay. And I have a problem with that. I also, if you want, I copied an idea of somebody else, you want to rate this as a report card. You have this many people who were highly advantageous, this many categories you're advantageous, this many that you were inadequate, and you have A's, C's, and F's. Do we want to go out there with some of those questions right now unless they're solved in the future? So after reviewing the books and going through all the things that are listed here as far as location, as far as traffic, I mean, I have questions on traffic at both locations, not just one. I have questions on security, and at this point, I'm not comfortable granting either one at this point, and I would rather see at this point too that we don't do this, we maybe do give the town the opportunity in the future to say exactly what they want, so.
Can I just clarify one thing?
Yeah.
I've just, the license, the LLC is in Christine's name.
Okay.
So the information that I have is old. So I apologize.
Okay.
So
It's
we've,
updated on the state.
Joe, we've identified that there is a path forward, and I put this to the whole board, there is a path forward to address potentially concerns with both applications. You know, from my perspective, I would want to ask CCC if they could limit their size. Chuck, you know, and limit their community impact in that regard. Chuck has expressed concerns with Littleton Apothecary. You and Paul have expressed broader concerns that maybe don't go back to the specific applicants. If I see a path forward for getting my concerns addressed. I mean, I think they're asking a big lift of CCC to sort of re-envision their business plan and their impact. I think Chuck is expressing concerns that may be a big lift for Littleton Apothecary. That still only, let's suppose both of those are addressed. That still only puts 2 votes on the table for either applicant. Is there a way in which concerns could be mitigated for either or both applicants that would warrant extending the review, issuing specific requirements before we're even willing to enter into an HCA with these folks that we would want to see? Or is this a broader concern that is that no amount of revision could be addressed through?
Yeah, just a little bit of clarification on what Chase just said. In furtherance of the idea I floated earlier, I think in my comments, hopefully I made it clear that each of these applicants were not so flawed, my estimation anyway, that they couldn't have a proposal made that I could support. But to reference the preferred process I'd like to see is the next ballot vote opportunity that the town has, unless I'm forgetting something, is probably this next February or March when presidential primary ballots are going to happen. We could have a townwide vote at that time, again on the ballot, question specific for this, which would allow enough time to get another article for next spring's town meeting, and right after that, the same applicants and or others could be back in front of us with the clarity of knowing where the town stands on it and the time for each of those folks to solve the stated deficiencies that come up in these applications, or allow them to go out and come up with something different or whatever. I mean, that would be my preferred course of action on it, but if someone's got a brighter idea, I'm open to it.
I have concerns about the pocket veto approach.
I'd take a vote tonight, this morning rather, it feels like tonight, but
Keep going.
Well, I would vote on each of these, no. I mean, I think that procedure, that's what we should do, and that's why, and I was mindful, I think council's advice earlier in the work of the working group has reminded us that we have to show cause, and I tried to indicate that in each instance. I think we've got legitimate cause. You folks have each, in your particular concerns have detailed that as well. So I think we could do that, and that takes care of our legal obligations right now, and then we can go forward, in any variety of ways. I'm just suggesting one.
So, have we reached the point we want to take a vote? And
I would think individual votes, but whenever we get to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's, doesn't take a rocket science to kind of do the math, right? You need 3 votes in order for, to be voted up or voted down. And it looks like Chase and I at this point are willing to vote yes on one or both with some conditions in place.
I would vote, to clarify, I would vote yes on both, as long as that is a vote to enter into negotiations.
Yeah, it's all
with both, right? And I would have some pretty strong expectations about what would need to be changed before I would be willing to sign an HCA. But I would enter into negotiations with both. Does that make some sense?
Mm-hmm. So my concerns with comments that both you and Paul made, Mr. Chairman, are taking into consideration all that's going on in town, the library, the sewer, the senior center, and so forth. We need to be, certainly, we're always aware of those things going on. We don't make any decision without knowing what the impact, hopefully not knowing what the impact, or the anticipated impact will be. And I'm going to get tomatoes thrown at me, but we are in fact a yes community. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I voted no in November of 2016. But when we get a majority, however big the majority is, that gives us, that's kind of how that's the rudder to our ship. When the community speaks, we have to act based upon those folks that did make that decision. I'm sympathetic to the fact and hearing a lot from folks that have reached out to me, friends and folks I didn't previously know, that there was some ambiguity. There was it wasn't necessarily as clear as not maybe, it should have been or could have been. So maybe some folks didn't show up because they didn't have all the information, didn't think they had an alternative. Maybe we could have made an amendment on the floor, but that's water under the bridge. The fact remains right now that we are a yes community. We've had several submissions. We've got 2 applications in front of us. To Chase's point, if we make a vote today to go into HCA negotiations, that gets us to the next step. And I think that we would be very discerning at that point. But for us at this point, again, Paul, to your point, there's a number of reasons that may be incurable. We don't. I can't state right now that those are in fact incurable right now, and I think that by entering into negotiations, that we may be able to get to the point where we determine that something can't be fixed, whatever that something happens to be. So. I don't know that either of you are going to change to allow us to go to the negotiations at this point, so I'll have further deliberation or some.
I would entertain a vote on each one.
All of you individually?
Yeah, wouldn't be right to do.
I do think you kind of need a motion, and I just wanted to just clarify that there's 2 processes that I think you're discussing, and the one is, your response to the proposals you have before us, and the other is kind of a longer-term strategy with how you want to deal with adult use in town. And those are two different issues. So it sounds like you're leading towards some sort of a vote on the proposals before you. And as we said, they can take a number of different forms. It can be a yes, it can be a no, it can be a think about it more, it can be a let them come forward with more information at the time you're ready to look at more information.
Is it correct, counsel, that our guidance has been that if we're voting no that we should state cause?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So are you looking for a motion, Joe?
Yeah, please.
I would put it in the affirmative. I would move that the Board of Selectmen vote to begin negotiations on a host community agreement with Littleton Apothecary. That's a form of the motion in front of us. So is that sufficient to you?
I'll second it for purposes of discussion.
Motion's been made and seconded. Further discussion?
I'll just reiterate that I'm enthusiastic about the general proposal, but at this time, I don't have confidence in in either the security plan or the settled issues with the management structure that I would feel comfortable supporting it with the vote right now until those issues are resolved in whatever process the town may have in place in the future.
I would base my vote on the security and I say traffic. I have a traffic issue is how it might affect the businesses that are behind there. So those are my reasons for having a no vote.
I don't see anything that couldn't be resolved through a vigorous negotiation of a host community agreement.
So let's call for a vote.
Let's check in anything there.
I mean, I stated that some of the things that you mentioned, honestly, Joe, I did consider traffic on this site. I do think it's a difficult situation, and there is, based upon the real estate and what, like you said, the business and back. I'll be frank, I hadn't thought about that as an impact. I was thinking about more of that 160 building out to the road.
Mm-hmm.
I did have some concerns about potential having a second egress as it relates to the building to the right, but I didn't even take it, because I did drive down there and turned around and came around the entire building, but I didn't take into consideration the businesses down back as we brought up that, the impact on businesses at King Street. So, I just call the vote. I've already said my piece, I guess.
Okay. Motion was made and seconded in the affirmative.
In the affirmative, that's right, to begin negotiations on a host community.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Nay. Now I would entertain a motion for CCC.
I would move that the Board of Selectmen vote to begin negotiations on a host community agreement with, make sure I get it right, with Community Care Collective.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Further discussion?
My qualifier to this is that I fundamentally would not accept a host community agreement that has the degree of community impact that the current proposal does. I think displacing that number of businesses is not in the community's interest, recognizing that a certain amount of destructive growth is a component of businesses. This is imbalanced and not in the town's favor as it's currently put in front of us.
Again, well, my greater concerns are having a process that we can all be confident in and walk away from with appreciation that everybody has been informed. My specific concern on this one has to do with unresolved issues, or frankly, the lack of effort to resolve issues with neighbors, at least at the present time, and would consider that a disqualifier, but not something that would prevent application in the future. So I'd vote no on that basis.
I feel as though this was the best applicant that came forward. I do feel as though any issues that we have are curable. You know, whether or not a business owner decides to cure any hurdles or any impacts prior to getting authorization to open the business on a location, I don't see that as a good reason not to move forward. I think that entering into an HCA with some of the issues that Chase has raised are similar issues that were raised by the working group, and I share many of those issues, but I do feel as though they are curable with different mitigation procedures and plans that were put forward by the applicant. And I think that not seeing any incurable issues, and again, being a yes community, I think that it makes sense for us to move forward with Community Care Collective through the negotiation of an HCA. And if we're not able to get to the point where we feel as though we've mitigated the impact on the neighborhood or the traffic or any other issues as far as the business are concerned, then the negotiation breaks down and we proceed with the other issue, which is addressing anything from limiting the number of retail establishments, limiting the type of marijuana businesses, or banning. We can take a vote to ban it as well. I mean, we can reverse the vote of 2016. So my recommendation and urge would be for us to vote in the affirmative for Community Care Collective and enter into negotiations. And I hope that you see the value in that and allow us to go down that road and answer to the folks that did in fact vote yes in November of 2016.
I have a couple concerns as far as the CCC goes. A lot of concerns about the site, even though it's in the location that was okayed. I still think there's a negative impact on the area. I share some of Chase's concern about the businesses being affected and the whole area being affected. I also have a concern that although Mr. Giannetta's financial plan seems extremely strong, that it's my understanding that he has applications out in other towns, and would that be sustainable if he were to be approved in all 3 towns? So that's a question. And then if he's not successful, he hasn't actually supplied us with what happens when I don't know, you don't have the right terminology here. The wind down if it doesn't work. So my vote in this case would be in the negative. So if there's no further discussion,
Is that enough cause for, I guess the impact on the neighborhood is enough cause to vote no?
In my case it is.
Yeah, okay.
So the motion was in the affirmative.
Okay. All those in favor of CCC signify by saying aye.
Can I, in favor of entering into host community
Yeah.
agreement negotiations with CCC, correct?
Yeah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay.
No.
All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Before anyone entertains a motion to close the meeting, I've received word from the the DPW superintendent that on a completely different subject, which I would like to mention, that the sidewalk project for the high school, the contractor specifically is concerned that they're not going to finish the work at that site if they have to wait another week and a few days, and he's asking if the board would be willing to entertain taking up that matter. Under the open meeting law, the chair must list items that the chair was advised of 48 hours in advance of a meeting. In this case, you were not advised of this, nor of course was I. if the board was willing to take this up at this time, and please feel free to seek council's opinion on this as well, you would have the right to do so considering the new information.
I think if you feel you need to, it does seem like a,
Sense of urgency.
well, this is a safety issue. If
Mhm.
we don't act, it sounds like there's a safety issue. If we don't act,
If we weren't meeting, we probably would have addressed it through email, so I don't think it's a big deal, whatever.
So,
as long as we can make it quick.
Yeah, the highway superintendent is on his way. He'll be here very soon.
Do we need to hear from him? I mean, can't we just take a moment?
I don't have the detailed information that you would have at your typical meeting.
Would we say no? I mean, what are we gonna say? Don't do this?
You could-
I mean,
you
Authorize the chair and the administrator to work through that one.
Award the contract to the lowest bidder, lowest and qualified bidder?
that's fine. Sure.
So is there a motion?
Yeah, just second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion adjourned.
Second.
Motion been made to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you all.
Thank you.